Yeah, it took an hour actually to do all that. I don't really know how. Yeah. Next time I'll probably order at around 45. Oh, it's because I had to pee. But anyway, let's get back to work. It is 12:30. We have about uh, 2.5 hours to maybe complete this homework. At least get a good portion of it done.
Of my error checking in like a validation file. Here I have the function check ID, which is only gonna just check the ID, and it's basically gonna do all of those same checks that we did in each of the functions in lecture 4. So here you see I'm checking to make sure it's provided. I'm making sure it's a string. I'm trimming it, right? I'm just overriding the value to be the trimmed value. If the length is 0, I'm saying cannot be cannot be an empty string or string with just spaces. And then I check to make sure that it can be converted to a valid object ID. And finally, I just return whatever was passed into the function. So now the idea is, say if some logic changed in my ID checking, I only have to change it in one place instead of having to change it in every single function that had that block of code, right? Now, another thing that I didn't really mention in the lecture, but I'll mention it in next lecture because it doesn't really pertain to this lecture, is the user is going to make a request to a route, right? Now, in this lecture, we're not having them have anything in the request body. So there's no data that we're creating. We're just focusing on getting the data that's already created. But if we were creating data, so they're going to input their stuff into a form or, in Postman, which we'll see, they'll click submit to submit it to the server. Your route is then going to validate all of the fields that are in that request body. So you're going to do all this validation. Then if it passes all that validation, then you're going to call the data function, passing in that same data. And then in that data function, you're doing input validation and checking again. So I always get asked, why do we have to do it in 2 places? And I have to go back to what I had mentioned in lecture 2 about the modularity nature of Node. Every file, like when you look at this application, you see one application. I see multiple modules. And the rule for modules is that any module that exports a function needs to have full input and error handling applied to it. The idea is that we should be able to plug this module into another system and it work just the same. So for example, I always get students to say, well, if I check it in the route, why do I have to check those same inputs again? If the route's calling that data function, why do I have to check those same inputs again in the data function? And I always respond with, as long as your data function is being called from that route, it will work, right? But now say there's a case your boss comes to you and says, oh, so-and-so, we have to update all this data tonight when no one's using the system. So you're gonna have to write a database script that's gonna go through and update all this data. So now maybe I'm calling one of those functions, right? So I'm importing those data functions and I'm calling them. If I didn't do input validation in the data function and I only said, oh, I only have to do it in the route, well, now that data function, if I plug that data function into any other module, it's not going to work, right? It's going to allow bad data to get through. Likewise, if I check everything in the route, and not check it in the route, but then I check it in the data function, well, that's fine and well and good. Your route will work as long as you're calling that data function that's checking. If you're not, then it's, it can, like say, for example, your boss comes to you, there's a route and it's initially calling a data function. Oh, we don't want it to call a data function, create this API instead. Well, if you didn't do the input validation and you relied on the input validation being in the data function, well, then it's going to allow bad data to get through there. So the idea is if you want a solid application, which should be the goal for every one of you, not doing less work, but making sure that you create a system that's as bulletproof as possible. You see this as one application. I see this as different layers of the same application. You have the routing layer, right? So you have that. You have the data layer, the presentation layer. We learned about 3-tier systems. I'm sure everyone in computer science knows the presentation, the logic layer, and the data layer. It's very simple. So on every layer of your application, you want to have these checks. And once we get into client side and actually having like a UI, a form, you're going to have to validate the data in the same data, 3 different places: client side, route, and then the data functions. Is it
mental note? When we're developing, there's 3 layers that we need to do our checks for input, validation, the UI, the data functions, which is our logic, I believe, and the routes. The routes, I think, are like the get, the post, the remove. I think it's that stuff.
Yes. Is it a pain in the butt? Yes. Is it the right way to do it? Yes. Does everybody always do it the right way? No, but I'm here to teach you the right way. I always get pushback on this of why we have to do it. I'm not teaching you to go the cheap, easy way, okay? I'm teaching you how to do it correctly. Now, with that said, if I'm writing an application and I know I'm the only developer that's going to ever work on that application, then sure, maybe I can get away with it. Right? I can say, okay, I'm checking the data functions. I don't really need to check in the route, right? But that's not the case all the time. In time, you might have team members that are working on data functions. You might have other team members that are working on the routing. Now, I implore you to go to your boss and say to him when he comes to you and says, or she comes to you, or they come to you and they say, hey, why did this data function, allow this bad data to get through? And you say, well, the routing guy, he should have been checking that. That's not going to fly. You have to make sure that you're doing your job and you're doing it right. So yes, I'm going to show you the right way. Now I do use these validation files and I do call them in both the routes and the data functions. So you just have to know that whenever if you were to modulize this and like say, oh, here's my route modules, that you include that validation file with it. When we install packages, it does install a bunch of different files that it uses internally and things like that. So I put all of my validation into one central place because I know I'm going to be calling the same check ID function in multiple times in users, multiple times in posts. So and multiple times in the routes post and routes users. So it makes sense to put it in its own little file, and then that way, if it ever updates, we can change that. So the only other difference between, now I'm calling the validation. Now, if you look at users, you can see I'm bringing in that validation file. Now, anytime, like for example, get user by ID. Well, I'm setting the ID parameter and I'm calling that function. So that function is going to validate the ID. And then we saw that it returns that
I
ID.
got lost.
At this point, you can see I'm bringing in that validation file. Now, anytime, like for example, get user by ID. Well, I'm setting the ID parameter and I'm calling that function. So that function is going to validate the ID. And then if we saw that it returns that ID. So now at point, the ID, the ID is returned, right? So we get the ID is going to have that return value, which is basically just the trimmed version of it, right? So now instead of having all of that logic here, I just call that function. Instead of here, right? I had all the different checking I checked like the name, first name, then I checked the last name. And if you go back to lecture 4, you'll see that. Here, I just say first name, but check string. And the second parameter I put is the field that I'm capturing because I want to say first name is not valid or last name is not valid. So I wrote a generic function where it'll take in like the prompt of what it's going to tell, hey, first name must be a string, last name must be a string, things like that. So that's the only differences. And the only other difference is that we have our data modules in a data folder, whereas in lecture 4, they were just kind of hanging out in the root. We still have our posts and our users, or in lecture 4, it was dogs and users. But now we have this index file. So what the index file is doing is we're just taking in these functions, right? So post data functions from post.js, user data functions from users.js, and I'm exporting them. That's all I'm doing. So the idea of this index file is maybe I create a new feature that has another file for data function.
Got distracted.
First name must be a string, last name must be a string, things like that. So that's the only differences. And the only other difference is that we have our data modules in a data folder, whereas in lecture 4, they were just kind of hanging out in the root. We still have our posts and our users, or in lecture 4, it was dogs and users. But now we have this index file. So what the index file is doing is we're just taking in these functions, right? So post data functions from post.js, user data functions from users.js, and I'm exporting them. That's all I'm doing. So the idea of this index file is maybe I create a new feature that has another file for data functions. Well, then I can just plop it into here and it helps maintaining it a little easier, right? Because now anytime I want to call them, I can just import this whole file. And it will import whichever functions I want. Maybe I just want the user ones. Maybe I want the data ones. Maybe in one file, I'm checking both user data and post data, like we saw in the post.js, right? So it helps with maintenance, but that's the only difference. So this index file is doing nothing more than importing our files and exporting them. That's it. So then there's that. So now our routing is what I'm going to write now. So we have a blank index, our routes for posts, our routes for users. Our app.js is blank, so I'm going to write all of that from scratch. Our C.js will go through after I write some code. Actually, let's go through it now. So we look at through C.js. It kind of looks like your app.js from your lecture 4, right? I bring in my connection. I bring in my data functions, right? And this time I'm just bringing them in individually. In this case, because I'm testing, and this is going to be testing, I drop the database so I don't get a whole bunch. And then again, I just start passing in data to test. So I'm going to run this initially. Now in my package JSON, you can see I added this seed task, which just runs node and it points in that tasks folder, C.js. So if I wanted to run this, npm run C. I hit enter. Oh, let's see. I remember this because of that new keyword, users 14. Oh, data functions, users 14. New. That was something they did with the package. This is new. And this is new. I just updated the package for this, so that's why new. Anytime we do that object ID, we have to use the new keyword. I don't know why they did that, but they did. All right, now I should be able to run seed. Hopefully I got all of them. Run seed. And it says done seeding the database. And if I open up Compass, you can see this is API-based blog. I have 4 blog posts, and then I have 4 users for those blog posts. Okay. All right. So now we're going to start to work on the routing and express part of it. So looking at my package JSON, I don't have express installed. So I'm just going to install that. So I do npm install express. Why are you popping up? Okay. So now I install express. If I look at the package JSON, you can see there's express there. So now we're going to start to work on our routing. So why don't we do the easiest file, which is our app.js first. All right, so the first one that we're going to do is our app.js. Now, some of the stuff I haven't written yet. I mean, that I'm going to put in the app.js hasn't been created yet, but I will write out all the code. So now in the app.js, the first thing that we want to do is we want to import express from express. Then the next thing that we want to do is we want to define our application. So we'll call it app. And that is an instance of an express application. So we have that. Now, the next thing that we want to do is we want to configure the routes. Now, I haven't created that file yet, but we're going to do import config route functions. I'll just call it function. And that's from. And it's going to be routes index.js. So now we have that. So now that's going to export a function. So I'm going to call that function, passing in our app. And then finally, I'm going to do an app.listen. I'm listening on port 3000. And then the callback function, which is just going to say, hey, our server's running, so we know it's running, is equal to this. And we'll do a console.log.
What is, I just realized I have the code base right here. What is this here? Config. This is from this one. Routes. There. What is? What is config route function? Is it this?
Index.js. So now we have that. So now that's going to export a function.
I forget what the index.js even is.
Doing nothing more than importing our files and exporting them. We're passing in
Can you really go into it?
and we'll do a console.log.
Configuring route app.
We've got the server. Console.log. Our routes are running on HTTP. Localhost 2000. And that's it. And save the file. And that's all there is for the app.js. And this is basically what your app.js, there will be more lines of code in future lectures, but for now, this is all we have for our app.js. So now the next thing that we want to start doing is our, let's do the index for our routes. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to create this function that's exporting.
Index for routes. Yo, what is this? Where is this from? Maybe he'll explain it.
So I'll go into my routes. We're not dealing with data. We'll go into our index of our routes. So now the first thing I want to do is I'm going to import my other routing files. So import post routes from, and then path posts.js. And then we're going to do the same thing for the users. Import user routes from users. Okay. So now we have that. So now we're actually going to create that method that we're calling here. So that's going to be a const. And I'll call it constructor method equals. And we saw that we're passing in the app. So it's going to take the app as a parameter. As an input, takes in the app. And now what we're going to do is we're going to attach the routes to our application. So we use the app.use. So when this takes in two parameters, when the route is /post, meaning localhost 3000 /posts, we're going to use the post routes. When the URL is /users, we're going to use the routes that were defined in user routes. Now, if there's any other route, we want to do a 404. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say here app.use, and in here I'm going to put the wildcard. And instead of us doing like this thing, I'm going to actually put the function, right? Because basically these are functions. So we're going to see a parameter as an input parameter, takes in the app. And now what we're going to do is we're going to attach the routes to our application. So we use the app.use. So when this takes in two parameters, when the route is /post, meaning localhost 3000 /posts, we're going to use the post routes. When the URL is /users, we're going to use the routes that were defined in user routes. Now, if there's any other route, we want to do a 404. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to say here app.use, and in here, I'm going to put the wildcard. And instead of us doing like this thing, I'm going to actually put the function, right? Because basically these are functions. So we're going to see, I'm going to do request, that's for REQ, response. And what we're going to do there is do a response.setStatus, and a 404.json. And we're going to say error, route not found. And that's it. And then finally, we're going to export default the constructor method. So now that's our index. So we're calling this constructor method. So that's what our app is. It's calling this, but it's labeled as config routes in our app.js, passing in our app. And so it's going to set up and configure the routes for our application. So now why don't we start to work on the post routes? Okay. So now in posts, we have to import a couple different things. So I'm going to the constructor method. So now that's our index. So we're calling this constructor method. So that's what our app is. It's calling this, but it's labeled as config routes in our app.js, passing in app. And so
Sure.
it's going to set up and configure the routes for our application. So now why don't we start to work on the post routes? Okay. So now in posts, we have to import a couple different things. So I'm going to import the router from Express. Now I'm going to set a variable called router equal to be a new instance of the router, just like how we kind of did for the app. Now, since we're dealing with blog posts in here, and I want to call those blog post functions, I have to import those. So import, and I only want the post data. So post data from data posts.js. And then, actually, no, index.js, my bad. Index. Okay. And then I want to import my validation because I want my routes to call the validation. So that for now, it's in the data directory. In future lectures, you'll see I put the validation in the root. But for now, it's in the data directory, so I have to map to it there. So I'll do import validation from and data validation.js. So now I've imported everything. So now I can go and create my routes, and I'm going to use this router. So I'm going to show you two different ways to do the routes. Either way is exactly the same. It's just a matter of preference. So the way that I like to do them is like this. We do router.route, okay? Then we specify the route that this is for. So for example, if I do this, that's the root route. Now, because I'm in posts.js, this root is not the root of our server. It's not localhost 3000. It's the root of whichever path we're already in. So in our index, right, we say when the URL is /posts to use these post routes. So when I say the root here, that's actually the root of just /posts. That's the root, okay? So if they just go to /posts, this method's going to be called. So now we have the route. Now we would chain all the different HTTP verb methods. So for example, there's the get method, right? The get method is going to have an async function in it. Oh. And that's going to be, it's going to take in the request, the response, and then we're going to have our code here, which I'm going to write in a second. So now say if I wanted to do another HTTP verb for this same route, I can do .post and then do async, same thing, request, response, code here. I can do it for a put. And I'm just going to copy that. And I can do one for patch and delete.
Okay.
So even though it looks like this is all on multiple lines, it is just chaining them together. So it really is just like one big function call. Like I can put this all, together. But when we save it, it just kind of breaks it up and makes it a little readable. So now this is the way I prefer to do routes. Okay. So for example, you can see here we just defined the route once, and then all of the HTTP verbs for that route. So if they did a GET request to this route, it would go to this line, this code. If they did a POST request, it would go to here. Now this is the way I prefer to do routes, but this is not the way that was taught the first time back when I was a student in the class. I'll show you that way. So you can see we have this, right? So I can actually separate this into multiple functions by using a little bit different syntax. So I can say router.get, right? And now this takes in two parameters, the route and then the function. So it'd be async, request, response, get code here. Now say if I went, so this route is the equivalent of this route right here. But now say if I wanted to do another request method, well, I'd have to do this again. but I'd have to do it for the extra method, so post, right? If I wanted one for patch, I'd have to do patch. For delete, I'd have to do delete. So these functions and this is exactly the same. Well, not exactly, the syntax is different, but they work exactly the same. It's just a matter of preference. So when I took this course, and even when I was teaching the course, this is how I taught the routes, right? So, but you can see we're like duplicating this route every single time, right? So I thought it's a little cleaner that if you just say, hey, this is the route, and this is the get code and the methods that are changed to that route. So I only have to put that there, right? Whereas here I would have to have a separate function for each one of the methods, which some people like, some people prefer this way. I always ask in class like which method people like. Some people will say they prefer this way. Some people prefer this way. Like I said, both ways will work exactly the same. It's just a matter of preference. How I came across this way of doing it is I was looking up some documentation and I came across a post that did it like this, and I was like, wait, that looks different than what I'm used to. I'm used to doing routes like this. So then I was researching and I found out further that both ways work exactly the same. It's just a matter of preference. So I'm going to write routes like this, like I prefer them. Matter of fact, for just this one route, I will do them both, so you can kind of see that it's the same thing. So for the get, so when they go to localhost 3000/posts, and it's a get request, we want to retrieve all of the blog posts from the database. Yes. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a try, and in that try, I'm going to say I'm going to call my function. So I'm going to say const post list equals await post data dot get all posts. That's the data function, right? So now that's going to retrieve them, and now I want to respond with them, right? So I want the server to respond. So I'm going to do return response. That's what the res is. .json and the post list, and that's it. Now we have to do the catch e, and for this one I'll just do a res.status 500 .json error, and I'll just output the error. And that's the route. That's it. That's all we need. Now, these routes are not going to be hit. Okay, so we're not going to implement them for this lecture. But what I'll do is I'll just do a let x equals 5 in each one of them. Why? We'll see why I'm doing that. I'll put them in all the different methods. Okay. So now,
he doesn't really do anything here. Is this it? Get? Well, I thought get was 500. What the hell? Post. Oh, what is with this code base? Why is there two of them? Oh, this is for another route. You know, this whole time I'm like, what is a route? Is it is it like a home page and an about page type of deal? Possibly. Huh, interesting. The posts. Oh, that's the same. Huh. Let's see what he says is the difference.
Sure. But what I'll do is I'll just do a let x equals 5 in each one of them. Why? We'll see why I'm doing that. So I'll put them in all the different methods. Okay. So now if I wanted to do this way of routing, where I have the router.http verb, which we have to supply the route each time, I would do the same thing. So I can just copy that try catch and paste it in there.
Oh.
Right? And I would have to do the same thing for post and so forth, but I'm not going to do those, so I'll just take that away, and this will cause issues, so I'll take that away now. But that's just to show you that you can do it two different ways. Like I said, it's a matter of how you prefer. Some people prefer this way, doing a separate function for every HTTP verb. Some people think that this way is not as readable. It's just a matter of preference. Whichever way you prefer to do them, it's fine. So we have the route to get all posts, right? Because that's going to be the root. So when they go to localhost 3000/post, I want to retrieve all the blog posts from the database and return the JSON version of them. Now we're going to have a different route for the ID, so we can get a single post by its ID. So then again, I'm going to do router.route. Now, how we do a dynamic URL parameter is you do the slash, you do a colon, and then the name of that parameter. So this means ID, that's going to be a...
What did he say?
So then again, I'm going to do router.route. Now, so we have the route to get all posts, right? Because that's going to be the root. So when you go to localhost 3000/post, I want to retrieve all the blog posts from the database and return the JSON version of them. Now we're going to have a different route for the ID, so we can get a single post by its ID. So then again, I'm going to do router.route. Now, how we do a dynamic URL parameter is you do the slash, you do a colon, and then the name of that parameter. So this means
a different route. for using an ID. Repeat that one more time.
It's fine. So we have the route to get all posts, right? Because that's going to be the root. So when I go to localhost 3000/post,
You have the route to get all the posts. Okay.
I want to retrieve all the blog posts from the database and
All the blog posts from the database. Get the ID. Get a post by ID. Huh. So this would be posts with an ID. Huh. Interesting.
JSON version of them. Now we're going to have a different route for the ID, so we can get a single post by its ID. So then again, I'm going to do router.route. Now, how we do a dynamic URL parameter is you do the slash, you do a colon, and then the name of that parameter. So this means ID, that's going to be a dynamic route. So this will be a localhost 3000/posts / and then there's an ID. Okay. So for that, we're going to have a .get sync request response. Now for here, we're going to read the URL parameter from the URL. So how we can do that is we can read that in the request. That's one of the fields that's in the request. So I'm going to do another try catch here. So what I'll do is I'll just do try, and I'll write out the catch here really quick. I always forget to do the catch. And we'll do a return as dot status, and for whatever reason we'll do 400 just for now. Dot JSON, and we'll do. All right, actually we'll do error. There we go. So now we have the get for the ID. Now I want to chain the other ones on there. So what I can basically do is I can just copy this. Now notice when I saved it, it put the semicolon there. Right? If I do this, it puts the semicolon. If I try to do a dot put there, it's not going to work. The only one that gets the semicolon is the last in the chain. So we'll do just copy all of that stuff, which I think I did. Oops, no, I didn't. So we'll copy the post because we're not implementing those this time around. I'll have those. We have those. So now this is the route for the ID. Okay. So now let's work on the user routes. So the user routes is very, very similar. We're going to have the same type of stuff. But for one thing that we're going to do is for the ID before we move to users. Well, we're going to get this URL parameter. We don't know if this is going to be a valid object ID. It's going to.
I guess users would be the same type of deal. You can get a route that gets all the users. You can have a route that shows you all the users, or a route where you specifically put an ID. Okay, just an ID one. And all the users. Okay. Interesting. I still don't really get what is a route. Let's see.
string. All URL parameters come through as strings. So even if it's a number, if we had post/1, that 1 is going to come through as a string representation of the 1. So all URL parameters are strings, even if it's a number, even if it was /1, 2, 3, it's going to get a string representation of that. So the first thing that I want to do here in the try, right? Because we're gonna validate that ID. One, to make sure it's a string, it will be a string. Make sure that it's not just spaces. Make sure that it's a valid object ID. Trim it and so forth. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say, because you can overwrite variables. So how we can read this URL parameter is req.params dot and then whatever we named it in the route. So I named it ID, right? .id. So I'm saying this field is equal to our validation check ID, oops, and I'm passing in the req.params.id. Right? So that's going to validate it and trim it, make sure it can be converted to a valid object ID and so forth. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to get a single post, right? So I'm going to do that, and I'll do const my post is equal to await post data dot get post by ID, and I'm going to pass in that parameter, that URL parameter. And then I'll do a return res.json my post. And that's it. And then our route is done for us, okay? So that's it for our posts. And then these routes are not going to be implemented, but I have them, we're going to run them just so I can show you that the same URL will fire a different function depending on that HTML verb, okay? So now let's go on the users. So in users, I do want to bring in the same type of stuff. So let me just copy some of that stuff from here, right? I'll go in here, I just have to change this to user data, and that's it. So now we're going to have the same thing. So router.route, when the route is the root, and we're going to have the get method, and that's async, RQ, RES. And now for here, I'll do a try as well. Try catch, E. And for now, what I'll just do is res.status 500.json. And we'll do error E. So now what we want to do is get all the users from the database. So I'll do a const user list equals await user data dot get all users, and then return res.json user list. And that's it. And then, like I said, I'll have those same routes that we're not going to implement. I'll just define them. Right? And then finally, we're going to have the one for the ID. So why don't I just copy this and just modify it a little bit. So I'll copy that. So now this route is going to be getting a user by the ID. So we're going to have an ID parameter. For here, I'll do req.params .id, and we're going to do the validation on that. Validation.checkID. req.params.id. And this is going to be user. And this is going to be get user by ID. And we'll pass in the request.params.id. And then respond with the user. And that's it. So that's our routing for our application. So now the only thing to do is test this. Now I purposely left something out, so let's try to run this. So notice it's saying this does not provide an export name default. So in our route file, what we did, let's see, post routes from posts. Yes. So if you get this error, it's because we did all of this, but we have to export the router. So that's the last thing that we have to do. And we have to export it by default. So export, default, router. Now we also have to do that in our other routing file for users as well, because we want to export.
Okay.
So now when I run it, it runs fine, and we have our server, okay? So now let's, before I run this in debug mode, so I'm gonna open the browser, and what we'll do is I'll go to localhost 3000. I hit enter. Now it's showing us route not found. Why? Because the URL is not either /users or /post, so it's getting that catch-all. So if I go to users, and I hit enter, you can see I get my fine, and we have our server, okay?
What do you do? npm run dev.
So now let's, and we also have to do that in our other routing file for users as well, because we want to export that. So now when I run it, it runs fine, and we have our server, okay? So now let's, before I run this in debug mode, so I'm gonna open the browser, and what we'll do is I'll go to localhost 3000. I hit enter. Now it's showing us route not found. Why? Because the URL is not either /users or /post, so it's getting that catch-all. So if I go to users, and I hit enter, you can see I get my list of 2 users that are in the database. If I copy an ID, and I go to users / and then type in their ID.
What is this title?
And I get that single user. If I type in something that's not a valid object ID, well, it's going to tell me it's not a valid object ID, okay? If I had it just spaces, I think it just, URL parameters, I think it ignores the spaces. So we don't really have to worry about the spaces part of it. So that's one thing. So now if I go to /posts, that should give me the list of all the blog posts. If I copy one of the IDs, it will pull up that single blog post. If I try to type in something that can't be converted into a valid object ID, it's going to tell me that. However, if it is a valid object ID, but it can't be found, find when it's not there, G, it just comes back as invalid object ID. I think that won't be converted, but if it was a valid object ID but couldn't be found, then it would just say could not find. So now let's put this in the breakpoint mode. So now when you're in a browser, you can't do the post, the delete. We don't have a UI yet, which we'll talk about in a couple of weeks. You still can't do put, patch, or delete through a form natively, but we'll talk about that next week. So we're just doing GET requests. You can't really do a put, post, patch, or any of those other methods that we kind of wrote those functions for, but they're not really doing anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an application called Postman, and we're actually going to see that, and you're going to use that a lot more next week. But see, if you type in the URL, you give it the HTTP verb. So if I go to here, I know that this is going to give me not found because it's the root, right? So it's going to tell me, route not found. If I go to /users, I should get my list of users, right? I do. If I go to a single user, I can get a single user. Let's see if I can get this to say. Yeah, so that's a valid object ID, but that user is not found, okay? So we can see that. Now, if I go to posts, I get the list of posts. If I copy a post by its ID, and hit there. So now what I'm going to do, before I show you the same URL firing different functions, I'm going to stop the server. And I'm going to put it in breakpoint mode. So I'm going to run it in debug mode. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put breakpoints on all of these lines. Actually, let me do it in here. So I'm going to put a breakpoint on the let x equal 5 on all of the different routes. And I am going to put one on the get by ID route. I'm also going to put one on all of the root routes. And we're going to see that as well. So I'll put one there. Okay. So I have breakpoints. So now I'm going to run this app in debug mode. And the cool thing is that you can actually run and debug this as it's running, as the server is running. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the all posts. So let me go here and get all the posts, right? So when I click send, now you can see it's on breakpoint mode. We're in the get method, right? So we're going to retrieve those by calling get all posts from the database. We get those. That's the list of all our blog posts. Then we're going to respond. Notice that we're getting the list. The ID is an object ID. We're not converting it to a string anymore like we did in like points. So now I'm going to run this app in debug mode. And the cool thing is that you can actually run and debug this as it's running, as the server is running. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to get the all posts. So let me go here and get all the posts, right? So when I click send, now you can see it's on breakpoint mode. We're in the get method, right? So we're going to retrieve those by calling get all posts from the database. We get those. That's the list of all our blog posts. Then we're going to respond. Notice that we're getting the list. The ID is an object ID. We're not converting it to a string anymore like we did in lecture 4 because the res.json is actually converting that to a string for us. That's why we won't see object ID. So you can see we're doing res.json. If we look at this, this is a normal JavaScript object. How can I tell it doesn't have the quotes around the key names? We have single quotes around the string names, things like that. But when it gets sent to the browser, now notice, pause at this line. If I go back, it's still sending. So the server is back, basically, the client is waiting for a response from the server, but we haven't sent that response. We're going to send it right now. So it's going to respond with the JSON of the post. Responds, and then we go back and we get that, right? Same thing if I go for the post for ID.
That is pretty gangster.
And I run into that. So now it's going to validate that ID to make sure that it's valid.
Gangster, man.
Right? And it is. See, it's a string representation because that's what the URL parameter is. So now I'm going to call my get post by ID function to return that post. And you can see it brings it back, returns that single post, and then I do a res.json of that post, and it spits it out. And we get that.
That's so cool, dude.
So now, right, just to show you again, when I go to get and I go to the root and I click send, we're in the route for the root of posts, and we're in the get method. So it's going to do all of that. Now, watch what happens. Same URL, but I'm going to change the HTTP verb to post. When I do that, now look, it didn't stop in here. It didn't fire the get route. It fired the post route, right? Same thing if I go to one of the other HTTP verbs. I didn't send a response. I should have, let me send a response. So it just doesn't hang. Res.send X.
So I think
And
I'll
do that for
get
all-
the
just so it does it.
idea.
So it sends a response and we can, doesn't make the server hang. All right.
Just do
Restart.
this.
Whenever you make a server change, if you're debugging, or if you're running it, you have to stop the server and restart it again because it's not going to pick up that change. All right, so now I'll go into here, and you'll see when I go to post, boom, it goes to here, and it's going to just send 5 to the browser. Boom. Oh, I do not see what you complaining about. Invalid status code. Oh, because I didn't. When you do send, you have to do a status code.
Scripts.
I think it was on that line. Let's see. That was post line 20. Yeah. let's do, status. I guess with send, I don't use send too often. You have to include a status. Okay. So let's just do that.
Also do start over here.
All right, and we'll run the app in debug mode again.
Stop.
Okay. Now when I do it, boom, send the status, sends X, Y. Invalid status code, uncaught range error. It's telling me post line 20.
Awesome.
Mhm.
So what is this guy doing?
Why is it send? I don't understand why it's telling me that's an invalid status code. It should not be. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, there we go. I guess when you do a send, you have to do send status. In a regular JSON, we could just do a status. So I guess it's a send issue. All right, sorry about that. So now if we run it again, I'll just demonstrate that. So now if we do the post, it goes into the post function, right? It didn't stop here. We didn't get a breakpoint there. It's going to send a response, and that's it. Now if I go to delete, and I send that, notice now it's firing the delete. So that's how we can have the same URL do different things depending on that HTTP verb. So let's restart this again. And what I want to do is I want to get a post by the ID. So let's get all the blog posts. So we get the blog post from the database, respond with that. And I'm just doing that because I don't know ID offhand. Let's grab one from the bottom. Let's grab Aiden's blog post. So what we'll do is we'll do this, and I'll do that. Now when I click send, we're in the get of the ID parameter route. Okay, so I can read what that parameter is. You can see it's that string representation, right? So we're going to call the validation function, which I'll step into this time. So I'll step into that. We're in the check ID and make sure the ID is applied. That's a string. It's a URL parameter, so it's going to be a string. So I really didn't need this, but I wanted to use this maybe in other places. So maybe I do want to check in other cases. So it doesn't hurt to check, but it is going to be a string. All URL parameters are strings. We're going to trim it just in case it had any extra spaces. Then we check the length of it, make sure it's a valid object ID, and then finally we're going to return, right? So now we get the post by ID, passing in that ID. So it gets that post by that specific ID. You can see that post is returned, and it responds with a JSON for that post.
All right, we get it. Let's get started on this lab here. We're gonna stop sharing our screen. Unfortunately, I don't want to give my code away. But yeah, let's keep going. So let's read the lab. We can share a Chrome tab or a window. Sure, we can just share this. All right, why not? So JSON routes. All right. So we'll create a simple server that will provide data from an API. I don't know what that means, but hopefully we'll get it going. So you'll be downloading the JSON files. Sure, okay. You can download them. See what we can do with them in a moment. 6%. Shoot. Damn it. It's taking up so much battery. The stream. Okay. So for this lab, you must use, okay, so we're going to be installing all that. Sure, so we can do install Axios. Do not just dump this data into a file and read it. You must use Axios or fetch to fetch the data from the URL at runtime. Sure. General notes, but your browser may not natively do that. JSON view for Chrome. We might need that if we're going to look at it in the browser. So you'll use the folder structure. Good, we got Axios in our dependencies. You'll use the folder structure in the stub. Okay. Okay. Let's check out this stub. Wonder why it's called stub. So we have expanded our stub. Let's open this baby up. All right. So we'll start with throwing that in there. Throwing this in there. Throwing that in there. We're going to copy the folder. And we'll throw this in there. We'll also copy the folder. Cool. Got everything all nice and set up. Oops. Alrighty. Awesome. Awesome. So when making a GET request to HTTP localhost 3000/people, this route will return all the JSON data that is returned from the Axios call to people.json. It will respond with the array of all the people from the JSON file. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a little bit confused as to what to do. Let's read all this though. I mean, let's get started with our routes, maybe. Get stocks, get people, get stock by ID. Okay. That's so weird. I don't see any of that. And there's no mention of a database, like in the lab, like in the code walkthrough. So in data.js. We don't use any collections. Validation, users. Get all posts. Get posts by ID. Huh. How you can export data function. You'll import these functions into your routing files and call a relevant function depending on the route. Let's peep the index.js in the routes. Okay, so I guess we need express probably. This one's a little confusing, man. Install express. Right? Yeah. Axios. We need Axios too. That's JSON. I don't see any Axios. What are you talking about? Oh. Oh man. This one's a hard one. So I guess we gotta install npm Axios. It's weird. Huh. All right, so we got Axios Express. But am I tripping? What's the last one? Oh, I don't know. Wow, saying that. Let's try and make a route file. Huh. You will code the route in the file. You can import your get people function in the. Okay. How do I do that? Get ID. Because it looks like I have to figure it out on my own. In your route, you will use the res.json method. Let me check out the route again. For router from Express. Get all posts though. Toy shit. Phone post data. Yeah, but I gotta do that by myself. There's no Axios. You gotta figure out how Axios works if it can. Damn. Get data from the API. Use Axios to get data from it. Off. Wait, what the hell is Axios? Am I dumb? What the hell is Axios? I think I'm gonna bring my cool keyboard. I don't feel like anyone's gonna steal it. And if they do, I really don't care. But please don't steal it. Bro, am I dumb? Like, have I never seen this before? How do I do? Oh shit! What am I doing? Lecture 3. Let's pull up to lecture 3. Look at lab 3. Has it been graded? It's funny. It's funny how the effort I have to do to connect this all together. Like someone, an experienced, web programmer would probably be like, "What is this guy doing?" Let's check this out. Yeah, bro. Like I know I've heard about this somewhere. Oh, it's that simple. Where the hell is get people from though? Okay, I see. Okay, I see. All right. Damn, bro, my computer finna. Oh shit, we winning. Get stocks, get people. I'm going to get people by ID. All right. Yeah. All right. We don't need no link. I wonder why my computer is being like this. Being all silly and stuff. I don't know. Weird. Yeah, it's being so silly right now. All my shit freezing. All right. So I guess I'm gonna do some of this. Get people. Guess we'll just do cost data equals weight axios.get. Link the link here. Return data. Same deal with stocks, I assume. Right. Damn, my computer is being so slow. It's not good. It's not good, guys. All right, no biggie. Get stock by ID.